In the quiet town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, during the 1910s, everything was normal and ordinary. The town had cheerful people, businesses and trade were getting by, and everyone lived ordinary lives. But, as the years rolled by, things in Plainfield got eerily haunting after two women were found murdered, but strangely, their bodies disappeared. Soon, the town found out something unimaginable and unthinkable. A house that harbored horrifying things. The police even found the woman they were looking for, but her body was skinned and decapitated. Who could have done such a crime? Well, before we reveal the person, we want to take the time to thank each of the Talking Crime subscribers for engaging with our videos. It means so much to us when you engage in commenting on our videos, as it helps boost our motivation to share more videos like these. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to get updates on every new video that we post. The person who committed the crime was Edward GEIN, and he was considered one of the most ruthless serial killers in history. But before becoming a sadistic and inhuman killer, he was once a young boy who was filled with innocence, love, and laughter. So, what went wrong? Let's take you back to 1906 to get inside the life he lived. Edward GEIN was born on August 27, 1906, to a devoutly religious mother named Augusta Wilhelmine GEIN. He was Augusta's second-born child, following his older brother, Henry George GEIN, who was born in January 1901. Edward's childhood was not filled with roses, as his father, George Philip GEIN, would often drink alcohol excessively. He was unable to hold down a job for long periods of time, so the family was financially deprived on most days. This made Augusta, Edward's mother, harbor deep resentment towards her husband. But despite her resentment, she never pursued a divorce because of her religious beliefs. Augusta felt that her sons would turn like their father if she did not set the path right, so she took measures to make sure it didn't happen. She would preach to them from the Bible and would instill in them the belief that alcohol and all women, except herself, of course, were vessels of sin. While being indoctrinated with this, she also made sure that they practiced it. Both Edward and his brother Henry were not allowed to make any friends or even talk to other people in the town. Though she did believe that her sons should go to school, she made sure to discipline them if they were caught talking or making friends at school. These bizarre restrictions isolated the brothers from the rest of the world. Instead of spending their spare time playing with other kids their age, they were confined to doing chores on the farm. But despite all this, the brothers continued to show unwavering love and admiration for their mother until they grew up into young men. They would continue to work on the farm and make little to no contact with people who lived in the town. However, the sudden death of their father in 1940 left them devastated emotionally and financially. So, in order to gain some additional family income, they took on odd jobs as handymen for local residents. It was during this time that they managed to build a reputation as hardworking and trustworthy members of the community when they finally could interact with the townsmen. Edward was also able to secure some babysitting work. He particularly enjoyed this, as he liked being around children more than adults. Edward had never been allowed to interact with anyone his age since he was younger, so it may have been that he found it easier to relate to them as he shared a similar level of intellect. As the brothers soon started experiencing the world outside of their farm, Henry was the first to understand that what his mother had taught him when he was younger was all wrong. It was then that he started to reject his mother's ideals. Henry would often openly criticize his mother about how they were brought up. However, for Edward, it was another story. Edward believed every word his mother said. In fact, he idolized her. He was always around her a lot, and when Henry noticed this, he expressed his concern with how attached Edward got. However, Augusta would get defensive and say that he was too fragile to understand anything. This slowly turned into a souring relationship between Henry and Edward. For years after their father's death, in May 1944, a huge fire broke out close to the family home. Henry and Edward went out to tackle it. The blaze was eventually extinguished, but only Edward came back. Henry was nowhere to be found. Edward claimed that they got separated during the ordeal. Edward panicked and called the police to report Henry's disappearance. When the police arrived, they asked him where they were last together before they split up. However, surprisingly, Edward led them directly to his brother's body. Henry was not burned. His clothes were intact, and the only mark he had was a bruise on his head, which shows signs that he might have been struck. But, without any evidence, they ruled out the possibility of a murder case, and the cause of death was noted as asphyxiation. Around 1 year after Henry's death, Augusta suffered a stroke, and her health began to deteriorate. She spent more of her time confined to bed and acted more erratically than ever. Edward served as her only carer but was also the sole victim of her vicious mood swings. In a continued cycle of psychological and emotional abuse, Augusta would derogatorily compare her son to his useless father, but would then contrastingly show a softer maternal side and allow Ed to sleep in her bed. He continued living with his mother until she also died in 1945 following multiple strokes, leaving him devastated. Edward spent 39 years under his mother's roof and lived to serve her every need, and with her suddenly gone, he was alone for the first time in his life. To cope with his loss, he began visiting local cemeteries and digging up the bodies of deceased women. Why? Well, his intention was to create a woman's suit that he could wear. He wanted to physically recreate a version of his mother by wearing the suit. The thought itself is enough to explain the connection he had with his mother. In fact, it was her who had been spending years embedding in him that other women and feelings of pleasure were immoral, so to him it was as though he lost his only friend and one true love, and he was absolutely alone in the world. However, things changed when he met Mary Hogan in 1954, almost 10 years after his mother's death. She was a local tavern owner who was 54 years old. That same year, after meeting her, he shot her dead, loaded her onto a sled, and dragged her home. The reason? She looked like his mother. 3 years later, in the early days of November 1957, another woman named Bernice Wardens, who was 58 years old and a hardware store owner, was also killed. Bernice's son suspected Edward because, earlier, he often visited the store, which was unusual. He also said that Edward wanted to know more about his mother and even asked him her personal information. During the investigation, they found that Edward was the last person who visited the store that day. On learning this, they headed straight to Edward's home, but as they entered, they felt as though they had walked straight into a house of horrors. Not only did they find the woman they were looking for, dead, decapitated, and hanging from her ankles, they also found a number of shocking, grisly objects crafted by Edward GEIN. There were body parts that were made into household items. There were also pieces of clothing made from human skin, such as a pair of gloves, masks made from faces, chairs upholstered with skin. They also found organs stored in the refrigerator, a heart that sat atop the kitchen stove, and skulls that were used to make soup and cereal bowls. As the police investigated his home further, they found a room that belonged to his mother. Everything inside was well intact and maintained. However, the crucial detail was that Edward managed to carefully cut out parts without leaving a trace of any stench or waste. That same month, on November 16, 1957, Edward GEIN was arrested for the murder of Bernice. During the interrogation, Edward claimed that he felt a force building inside of him after he lost his mother. That force made him want to become his mother and crawl into her skin. So, in order to fulfill that desire, he started grave digging in search of body parts that he could sew up. But it all changed when he saw Mary Hogan and Bernice Wardens, because they looked similar to his mother. But were these the only murders he committed? Well, it was never proven, but it was believed that he could have also been responsible for other deaths that took place in plain sight. But even then, Edward pleaded not guilty to his crimes because he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Edward was then transferred to Mendota State Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin, where doctors tried to keep him legally sane. In 1967, Edward was found guilty and charged with a sentence of life imprisonment. However, he was hospitalized because of his mental condition. While hospitalized, he proved himself to be a model patient and enjoyed reading, occupational therapy, and the radio. Up until his death in 1984, he was not known to display violent tendencies or cause any trouble with other patients or staff. From birth, Augusta's overpowering personality stunted Edward's psychological growth, and this could have been the reason why he was obsessively devoted to his mother and why he acted the way he did. What did you think about this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.